say power to the people.
Our people.
We are here for power, right?
Yeah.
And we are here still to dismantle and topple the regime of capitalism
Hell
and
yeah.
imperialism that has oppressed us and set us back for hundreds of years and has given all types of disconnect to our people and all people, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
we are.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you. So we are grateful. We're grateful for this opportunity here at Verso. And as I said, I'm Joshua Dedmond. I am born and raised from Jackson, Mississippi. I appreciate y'all. This is my home. And to stand and share with you this transformational and regenerative experiment that we have going on in Jackson is a wonderful opportunity. There are faces in the room that are familiar, who've been to Jackson, who have labored and toiled and spent time with us, who have built solidarity and struggled with us in weather that is way hotter than this weather. so we are grateful for your solidarity. And so I wanted to take some time just to give you some grounding and to set you into what is Jackson, Mississippi. About 200,000 black people, well, 80% black, is Jackson, Mississippi. And what we have the opportunity to do with Cooperation Jackson, with this experiment, is really provide a framework, an unapologetically black and unapologetically leftist framework that provides this idea of transformational stewardship that transforms, it integrates and introduces people to the solidarity economy. And within the solidarity economy framework, we try to tease out those familial and communal dynamics and dimensions of the solidarity economy. And so with that, we've built a lot. Cooperation Jackson has 3 working worker-owner cooperatives. And when we mean working, that means the building from the ground up working. And so it's been wonderful to witness that experiment, to also employ young black people who have had much of no vision and see them develop a vision and develop politics as we go in that framework, as we dive deep into a political framework around self-determination. We are also have quite a few properties because the acquisition of land is a direct key to power and a direct key to transforming and changing the economic dynamics of people. And so within Cooperation Jackson, there are 7 houses. There are about 40 plots of land. There are also 3 commercial spaces. We have the Kawasi Lagoon Center, which is considerably our headquarters. We have the CPC across the street, the Community Production Center, where people have the opportunity to learn and develop skills at the seat of production, which changes the dynamic of what worker ownership can be when we have the power to produce ourselves. And then we have what I consider the hallmark, which is the Ida B. Wells Plaza, which is a space, a commercial space, where Kali is soon going to show you more nuts and bolts of our vision with the Ida B. Wells Plaza. But within the Ida B. Wells Plaza, we have what used to be a grocery store, and you're going to see those plans today. We also have some commercial spaces and some spaces for cultural development. So as I said, we are practicing this concept of transformational stewardship within our community land trust. We initially approach it with the concept of ceding the land back to the Choctaw Nation that once ran free on that land and had power on that land, ceding that and requesting of them that we be stewards on that land and work for a greater dynamic toward liberation. We only work in an unapologetically black framework. This is a black city. Jackson is the new chocolate city. If you didn't know it, you know it now. And so we work in this framework, and we are really attempting to, one, liberate folks' pockets by giving them the means of production, and then two, getting more leftist and leftist ideology, leftist frameworks, and leftist dynamics in a very revolutionary manner. I did this spiel a few days ago. I said revolution about 8 times. I promised I wasn't going to say revolution 8 times this time, but what we are doing is transformational and revolutionary. So I'm grateful for your support. With no further ado, because you didn't come to hear me talk all day, you came to hear Khalid, and so Khalid is going to share with you the growth and our dynamics of our wonderful experiment in Jackson.
All right, so thank y'all for coming out tonight, and thank Verso for hosting us yet again. I think this is 3 times in 3 years that we've done an event here at Verso. Last year it was myself. The year before that was me and Saki did an event, and now me and Joshua. So very thankful for folks opening up the doors, and I know spaces like this are few and far in between in New York now, and I think it's critical that we cherish them and support them to the greatest extent possible, because you need space to organize. Don't tell nobody, don't let nobody tell you differently. Even in the virtual kind of world that we now live in, it still has to exist somewhere in the 3-dimensional world, for things to move through. Now, that said, a couple of things to just note. So May 6, 2020 will be our 6-year anniversary. And I'm bringing that to say, this next, I think, 3 to 5 years will be profoundly different than the 5 we've had so far. And before that, there's a history to the development of this that goes back even further. But these last 5 years were extremely experimental. Despite all the prep and study a few of us it did, once you really try to put some things, in practice on the ground, you kind of find out real quickly some of your theories actually don't work. And you need some new theories, some new understanding. You got to have some people skills that you may not have had before, and the willingness to learn how to cultivate new people skills to meet the tasks involved. So we spent the last 5 years kind of doing that experiment, and we've learned a few things about some of what will work, some of what won't, and we've now got to experiment a little bit deeper based upon the foundation that we've laid. So one of the things that's going to take place, and I'm mentioning this because there's a way in which, we want as many people as possible, whether you live in Jackson or not, to be somewhat involved, really in kind of a broader thought experiment, right? About how to redesign our communities and how to build and how to connect with each other. As many of you have heard me say, we working as hard as we can in Jackson, but we ain't gonna survive in a bubble. So we're gonna need some support from all of you and folks throughout this empire, to make the change that we all need, I would argue. So what you see with some of these slides, this is profoundly different than some of the things we've done in the past. Folks who've seen us do presentations, it's normally been like pictures of our work and people doing things. This is more a vision of like what is the actual infrastructure we're looking at building during this next phase, right? And that's kind of like if there's a difference in what I was saying about the first 5 years to this next 2 or 3 years, I think there's more qualitative advance in the work itself and building the institutions, building the co-ops, building community land trust out, that we're really going to try to experiment with this next period, and some of this reflects where we're aiming to go. Now let me say, this is a good chunk of what you'll see is a preliminary vision. And why do I say preliminary vision? This is kind of some of our thinking with the consultation of Professor Nandini Bagchi, who's here. I don't know if she wants to raise her hand, who's been giving us some support. She's actually here in New York. So this is kind of like some of our preliminary thinking. But there's a broader kind of consultative process that we have to do with the folks in our community on various different levels. And we're really just starting that process. As a matter of fact, last Monday and Tuesday was kind of one iteration of going through some of this and trying to tease out, well, we have this land, what should we do with it? We have some ideas like that are very much kind of contained, kind of like in the staff within the co-ops, but like we aren't all going to live there, and it's going to be a part of a broader community. So we have to figure out the best way. How is it going to serve the broader community, and how the broader community is going to interact with it? So I say that to say, when you look at these pretty graphics, the final version of this might look profoundly different than what you're seeing now, right? And in some ways, I hope it does, because that will iterate a greater level of community involvement and engagement in the process. But just briefly, in terms of what we're going to be pushing for, the remainder of this year, for the fundraising drive, it's really like two major projects, and what I was talking about, kind of taking a qualitative leap. So, where we at with the Community Land Trust? We've acquired a decent amount of land that Joshua described, but there's two pieces in particular we want to do a deeper dive in to really enhance and expand the capacity of the overall initiative. So one is really doing the overhaul of the Ida B. Wells Plaza, which is a plaza we just acquired earlier this year in May. And it's literally like half of a whole block that we have, which is a shopping plaza. And we want to turn that into not just a commercial space, but a broader community organizing space. And it's really critical to understand the importance of this to us. The acquisition of this property, and I'm not overstating this, but it's radically changed the prospects of gentrification in our neighborhood. It's literally taking some chess pieces off the board that some of the greater forces in our community that are pushing gentrification, and they are known entities, they're not abstract. We know who they are. We know what their agenda is. Literally had to just take some things off of their agenda. Don't mean that they're not going to find some way to come back or reorganize or regroup. We know that they will. But at least in the short term, some of the plans that they were planning to execute to gentrify Capitol Street, which is where almost all of our three major commercial buildings are, between ourselves and a homeless service provider that lives across the street. The main entryway now, we basically, between our two organizations, we pretty much have it on lock, and they really can't do anything in a critical section. And I think it's one of the factors that force some of these entities, some of these players, to give up and really kind of divest from the Jackson Zoo, which is further down the street, because they've been trying to pressure the city the past couple of years to allow them to have, like the board to have greater control over it rather than the city, so that they could use it as a staging ground for gentrification around some of the things around it. And so we basically, ourselves and another organization, not just in addition to the SUPOT, the homeless service provider, but one of our sister organizations, the Cooperative Community of West Jackson, between us now on that corridor, all together we have about like 120 something properties, like within this neighborhood that we're working on developing. And so that's a big game changer. But for us, we've been in this phase the past 5 years of acquiring, right? The actually kind of redevelopment of it is a different process. It's a slower process. It's got to be a more intentional process. And so the one piece that we really want to do, we want to fix up the whole plaza, but we want to start by creating a food security entity within it, which is an aquaponic, hydroponic setup. So you see part of that where it has the fresh produce and the aquaponic farming, when we go deeper in that, you see the space that used to be the grocery store, which is the largest unit in that plaza. We want to convert that basically into this food production site. Mm-hmm. And the aim and the objective is within our immediate kind of base area community, which hopefully you get to see. There's roughly 30,000 people, 25 to 30,000 people, depending on how you count and who does the counting, that live in this area. And what we've tried to map out over the course of the next few years is be able, with this operation and some of the other urban farms we have in the community, be able to scale up our own production to be able to provide the caloric intake for 20,000 of those people. Mm-hmm. Right? And trying to get to this level so that we create a model that could then be replicated to other communities throughout Jackson, so that we can make Jackson a food sovereign area. And this is it's got two objectives for folks to be clear. One is to change social relationships. And we know ultimately, to kind of get where we want to go, we need to abolish wage labor, mm-hmm. right? And so that's a long-term process. It's not going to be an easy notion. Many before us have tried it, many before have failed. We got to learn from those processes. But one of the things that we know that was a big problem, in a lot of the revolutionary movements of the 19th and 20th century was what? Bridging the gap between town and country, bridging the gap between how do you actually produce enough and not totally be extractive with the rural populations or the peasantry in relationships that were deeply exploitative in a lot of the other experiments that happened. Well, this is a means that we're trying to do it and do it in a way that's ecologically sustainable, because we're doing this all within kind of walking distance, which is very intentional, mm-hmm. right? To cut down CO2 emissions, to cut down having to, buy food from Argentina that you can grow in your own yard, or within a kind of broader community production. So that's one thing towards reaching a certain level of strategic relationships. The other one is much more defensive. Food is also a weapon, right? And in the context of the kind of very in-your-face white supremacy that exists right next door, literally, to where many of us live, we know this is something that can and will be used against us, because it has been used against us in Mississippi in the past. And so rather than being dependent on some other folks who don't have our interests in mind to produce for us, we got to scale up our production ourselves to break that chain of dependency. So that's why this is really important to us, and why food security, moving and aiming towards food sovereignty for our community, has been and will remain like kind of a top priority, right? Mm-hmm. So that's one of the critical things here that we want to do, and we're trying to fundraise for. And the other thing is really take the next step in advancing what we call our Ewing Street Eco Village site on the community land trust, which is about it's about 1/4 of a mile. Yeah. Like, it's in quick walking distance, these two properties. All right, and Ewing Street is a street we roughly own about 70% of. It's been vacant pretty much for years, and we've kind of designated this to be the site that we really want to try to do a major experiment on. And that is some, hippie, utopian, exclusionary piece, but create the dynamics that we can create the conditions that all the people in our community, whether they actually live in the eco-village or not, can benefit from the practices of the eco-village. So one is like providing a community solar power plant on that site that could then feed the broader community and take as much of the broader community off the grid as possible, right? So that's a broader piece of whether people actually live in a land trust or not. How do we develop in practices that we engage with folks who are in a different set of relationship with their land at present, that we can gradually over time move people into a different set of relationships that are more community with each other. And so what we were hoping to do, this is one of the things where reality teaches you some lessons, where your plans might be great and pretty and beautiful, but as human beings you've got to deal with and their limitations. So what we were hoping to do in 2020 was actually start building houses. Well, that's actually not going to happen. And it's not going to happen not through us not making sufficient effort. What folks have been working on, trying to learn how to do this through community production techniques, there's actually a whole bunch of shit we got to learn, right, to be able to do it and do it in a proficient manner. And what we learned from folks taking the class is they got a lot to learn. So, one of the benefits of kind of owning your own land, you can work at your own pace. So, we can slow some things down and adjust, which is what we're now doing, and figure out how to scale over time to match, the actual kind of slow development of the land and working with things that we can do now to experiment on, to remediate the soil, to start doing some deeper level of planning and engagement, and then learn those skills over a broader sense of time and bring more people into it. So we still want to move it, but that's the second thing that we're really aiming to do some fundraising for this year, and looking at the overall budget, part of which I kind of put into the slide. To do all of this work at a very qualitative level, you would think, well, I can tell you, in New York, what I'm talking about will probably take $10 to $15 million, right, to even scratch the surface in doing it. We're trying to do all that within the context of $250,000, and we can do pretty much everything we plan to do within the course of the year by raising $250,000, right? So that's reachable, it's attainable. Through a couple of generous donations from this very room last year, we actually met that goal and exceeded it throughout the course of doing fundraising last year. We want to try to, at least match that. This year in New York, some other comrades in the Bay Area, another big home of capital, like New York City. We're going to try to do something similar and see if they can squeeze some money out of some of the deep pockets around Silicon Valley. So those are the two big things, in terms of what we want to present to you tonight. Hopefully we can just let the PowerPoint, run. One of the other things that I was talking about being inclusive about, we just started trying to embark on a new strategic visioning process within Cooperation Jackson. And not because we think that the foundation that we laid on is bad or anything like that, but things change. They don't stay static. They don't stay in the same place from week to week, right? And there are some ways, I'll just speak for myself, in which I think trying to hold so tightly to the original vision is actually kind of a hindrance to the development of the work, or has been. And now it's like, okay, let's open it up and let's work with the folks that are there in front of us who weren't in the initial conversations 10, 15 years ago when the Jackson Push Plan developed, right? And there are ways in which, and I'm probably, the biggest perpetrator in this is one of the people who actually did all the work many moons ago to kind of put these ideas, into a formal place. Sometimes doggedly holding on to them in a way which I know to some folks might come off to being very democratic. I'm undemocratic. It's like, no, I'm holding on to this, like a pit bull, but like, I don't understand the assumptions that were made into this decision, or why things are going this way, or why you did X, Y, and Z. I showed up last year and I came with these ideas. Is there room for those? Right? And ultimately there has to be, right? And so that's something we're gonna do now, is like work with the new crew and say, let's starting with, not completely from scratch, but like let's start with the dynamics as they are now and deepen our analysis. So that's part of one of the things. We'll share some of those tools in a broad way with folks publicly, which we're planning on doing, so folks can make some contribution and at least kind of hopefully learn from the methodology that we're using. And it's nothing like new or groundbreaking. I think it's just maybe new to a certain generation. But I want to introduce it because I think the process, and it took us in total about 5 years to really use the tools that we use to come up with the Jackson Kush Plan. looking out from afar, I see that there's a great need for our younger generation, and I'm not just trying to cap on the young, but to learn about how to do certain type of strategic planning that I don't see the movement providing at this time, just to be honest. In part because we don't have some of the organizations that we used to have that will provide that kind of education and training. And then two, I think we've just all been socialized pretty badly the last couple of decades in a way that just doesn't encourage us to actually want to work and build with each other.
Last question for each other.
So try to get out of that habit, that bad habit. So hoping you'll join us in some level of engagement, you know, to our own capacity once we pull all that out. So I'll stop there and see if there's just any questions while we're waiting to see if the slides come up. And we're gonna take a progressive stack, just so folks are clear. All right?
Yeah, just a quick question about the 20,000 people that live right around the area that you're building in. How many people there are employed and unemployed, and where do people work in that? If they are employed in that.
Did everybody hear the question? So of the folks in our base area, how many people are employed or unemployed or marginally employed? And then what was part?
What kind of jobs?
And what kind of jobs do they do and where? In our area, some of this is scientifically analyzed, some of it is guesswork, but guesswork based on like our outreach work.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say the way we've been saying it for years. You can knock on any door in our neighborhood, but almost pretty much throughout Jackson, Mississippi, anytime between the hours of 8 and say 6 o'clock, and the chances are about 90% you're gonna find an able-bodied adult that will answer the door.
Mm-hmm.
So that means folks are not working.
Mm-hmm.
To give you a sense that if they can answer, or now it works, now it wants to work.
Find out. No.
Okay, I can say it just don't I was like, it just don't like me, huh? You know.
Yeah.
All right, so this is the right on time question. So this area you see in red is basically kind of what we describe as like our base area.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's the portion of West Jackson that this is in is actually larger than that. And this red area does not cover 20,000 people, just to be clear. This red area is where all of our properties are located. And that's what you see in green. Okay? Where most of the stuff is at. And you see the numbers that people kind of laid out. So within this area, I would say the real unemployment is roughly easily over about 50%.
I say 70.
You say about 70?
Yeah.
I mean, this is what's good to have a pointer. Okay. So folks understand this 1 and 2, and then we actually own this property here that's right next to it. So this is all the Balagoon Center here. All of what you see here, which is 3, that's both the buildings of the Community Production Center, and 4 is the plaza.
Got it.
Right? Ewing Street is this number 5, right? This spot right over here, okay? You can kind of see the easy relationship in terms of walking distance. Now, this right here, this is Poindexter Park. This is a major job provider in our community in terms of the underground economy.
And a job hindrance.
So a high area of self-employment in the form of narcotics and sex work. And the other critical area was a high area of traffic around this kind of whole section here, this is the, well, how would you put it? So this whole section, like right over here, there's roughly at any given time, there's about 200 or 300 homeless people who live in that area. At any given time, you know, the hotter months is more, colder months, folks kind of move out and spread out. Stew Pot, the organization I was telling you about, they own all the property from where this is from here to here. And then they own all the property from here to here. So they own more of the Capitol Street block than we do. They've been there a lot longer. And they've been they've been under some serious attack. And they're not on the surface a political organization. They just in their own way, they try to do the Lord's work, and they do it to the best of their ability. But they have been under some severe attack for about a decade until we kind of showed up, and even while we showed up, they've been under attack. So since we've been there, 3 of their buildings have been mysteriously burnt down. Their women's and children's home was burnt twice. Their service provision home was like distribution center, which is right here, like in this section right here. That's been burnt down for now like a year and a half, or burnt out. You know, and we know what the kind of the racket is. Some of the good old boys from downtown, you know, can pay, you know, some folks, homeless folks, a couple of dollars, or provide them with some drugs. That's their game, the racket. They burn out houses all throughout the community, you know, so folks can get the insurance premiums, or in this case, trying to get them to move out, right? Because Stew Pot is one of those organizations, I mean, it operates at a deficit every year. You know, they always $50,000 behind, $100,000 behind. Every year they're doing some Save Stew Pot, you know, major kind of campaign. And most of the year they either get there or they make it, you know, so they find a way to kind of stay open. But they've been under some serious attack. Now, since we moved there, that's kind of softened up. And so in many respects, you know, because of who they are, we have never asked them, in terms of strategy, we've never asked them for a formal alliance. I want y'all to be clear about that. But we found a very symbiotic relationship with each other, right? And like we are the first neighbor they've really ever had who never went down to City Hall and asked for the homeless to be removed or to be contained in some way or to be controlled or get them to move. So there's ways in which they're like, y'all keep doing what y'all doing, and we get from them all the time, you know, because, you know, it's not like we don't have issues with some of the folks who come through. Trust me, stuff wind up missing, you know, people be shitting in the backyard all the time or sleeping different places. So it's not like we don't have our struggles and there's some rosy picture that everything is, you know, some idyllic paradise. Do not get that in your head. That is not what's going on, right? You know, but our broader, our politics are rooted in this is who's in the community, this is us, and this is the work that we're going to have to work to do to transform ourselves. So it's not something separate or distinct from ourselves, but this is what the neighborhood is, and this is who's largely in the neighborhood. Now, we have some NIMBY forces in town, in this neighborhood. There's some forces who want the homeless cleaned up, who don't want any renters in the neighborhood. They right there, and you know, we got to coexist with them too. But that's a long-term struggle and stuff that's engaged. I don't know if you want to.
Oh, well, you know, speaking of Stew Pot, we also practice a level of mutual aid when we are doing something large. Stew Pot residents, they know to come and eat because we feeding everybody. Just a small caveat.
Yeah. So, and we do back and forth. Like, you know, when we have food, we give it to them. If we have stuff left over, they'll send people our way. You know, they've sent a good number of recommendations. I was about 5 of our steady day laborer folks that work with us that's coming into worker ownership through a process have come directly from recommendations from Stu Pott, particularly on 2 of the teams, so that, you know, there's that relationship. Now over in, okay, thank you. Most of, if you see like this big area here, that used to be a elementary school. This big area here used to be middle school. Both of them are now closed, so there is no immediate school in this vicinity. Further down the street, about right where this light would be, there's an elementary school. So that's the only kind of walking school that's over here, which is right across the street from a boys and girls club. But this is kind of what our base area is. Now to answer the question, and then we're gonna come over here and answer the question. Most of the folks that we know are in a concrete relationship here in this community, the stable kind of working class elements in this community, they work primarily for the government in one form or another.
Got it.
Now, to understand what Jackson is, the largest employer in town by far away is the government. One form of government or another. So I'm saying government, I'm saying federal government, state government, the municipal government, county government, right? And I'm also including in that folks who work for the police department, folks who work for the school district. So if you include all that, that is by far and away the largest employer in Jackson. Clearly by far and away the largest employer in Jackson. The second larger employer by sector in Jackson is healthcare, right? Jackson is kind of the hub of the state's special healthcare unit. So that you got the largest hospital in the state is in Jackson, and that's Mississippi State's Ole Miss's University Hospital, and its subdivisions like the Children's Hospital, right? So that's about 3 miles this way, right, to the north of that way. The third largest employer by sector in Jackson would then be transport, right? Trucking, rail, and for folks to understand like where Jackson fits into kind of the national, international economy, Jackson is a transport hub. That's what it is, right? And so we have Jackson, so you understand what it's historically situated to do. It's a transit node between New Orleans and Chicago, right? That is how it's been laid out fundamentally from north to south as a midpoint to do hauling and shipping primarily off on land particularly after the Civil War. So it's just far enough or close enough to the Mississippi River that it can be a transport by rail. And it was also just far enough to be a defensible position from it, from the folks who kind of developed it. And Jackson was not the original capital of the state of Mississippi. Just so folks know. The original capital was Natchez, which is right on the river, okay? And it's the oldest colonial city in Mississippi, Natchez is. First settled by, or conquered by the French, basically. So, what we have, you got and you can see kind of where this neighborhood is really laid out. This is all train tracks, right? You see all this?
Oh, yeah.
All that you see right there, that's the train track. This is your north-south track. The Amtrak line that runs directly from New Orleans to Chicago runs right here. The train track is right where you see this Greyhound. The Greyhound and the Amtrak station are right there. The train station is right there. But also all the main freight and stuff that comes off. So this train line here that you see that's going right there, this train line goes to its purpose, or why this one particularly was built, was to bring down agricultural products from the Mississippi Delta into the industrial kind of heartland that was of what Jackson, Mississippi is and what it's about. That's why that railroad exists. And this one, where they're part of one of the 2 conjunctions that exist, again, this takes you from New Orleans, which is straight down that way, And the first big stop is Memphis. And Jackson is situated, we're exactly 3 hours from New Orleans and exactly 3 hours from Memphis, right? And that's not by accident. That was by design of folks who, when they kind of laid some stuff out. Now, the fourth largest employer in Mississippi, take a guess what y'all think that might be, by sector. Huh? Nope. Underground economy. Particularly sex work. That's the fourth largest by sector employer. This is by government figures, not just by ours, right? And so to give you a sense of what you're dealing with, unfortunately, Jackson has, what we at,
Number 3 on.
3 in HIV, AIDS,
Yeah.
and I think number 2 or 3 in syphilis and gonorrhea. And anybody next time you come to visit us, and hopefully all of y'all will come, when you walk outside the Balagoon Center or anything on Capitol Street, there's a big sign,
Always designated.
and there's always designated something about STDs or HIV that's on that billboard.
Yeah.
All the time.
Right now.
So right now, if you go in there, there's a big sign with a bare-chested guy that says syphilis is real or something like that. Syphilis is serious.
I was about to say
Syphilis is
syphilis
serious.
is back, but no. It's,
Right? Syphilis is serious. It's a big sign,
yeah.
right? And that's not like some targeted discrimination. Like, that's how bad some of these conditions are in Jackson in regards to the nature of the sex trade that's going on. Jackson is also a pretty substantial slavery hub. I don't like that term, human trafficking. Slavery hub of what's going on. Primarily, in our case, moving folks from Mississippi, primarily poor black women from throughout the state, but particularly the Delta. Also, young black men. Probably about 15 to 20% of that from the statistics. Folks are being moved, but the other challenge is moving folks from the Caribbean and Central America, up through this route. Young women in particular up through this route. So you get an understanding of what the economy is in Jackson, and then the fifth one after that really is beauty. Cosmopolitan, cosmetology, that's number 5.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right? So you get an understanding of the context and the environment that we're working in. So there was a question here.
Oh, if it's okay, I got 3 questions. First question would be, do you have a legalistic framework for your land trust? Like, I know in the 60s, like a lot of folks were taking over buildings and the city council would have to sell the building to them for like $1 or something. Is there like a legalistic framework that you guys have worked through to do the community land trust? Or is that just, I don't know how you acquire the properties. Second issue would be...
Can I take them one by one?
Yeah.
Just to be quick, and Josh will jump in at any point.
All right.
So our community land trust is registered through our nonprofit division. So all of the properties, with the exception of 2, are owned by our nonprofit, by the Cooperation Jackson, Mississippi Incorporated. And so we specifically built the land trust as of now into the overall operations of our nonprofit, and it has 2 seats on our nonprofit board. So it is a holder. Now, Mississippi does actually not have specific statutes around land trusts. The only other land trust that currently kind of exists and really only exists in the books is one that's down in Gulfport, right? And they kind of created some of the legal statute right after Hurricane Katrina to try to develop theirs. They got that off the ground, but I'm not quite sure what happened with their development. So that's on the books. We've used some of it just didn't fit our context. But we know, and this is something we're talking to Nandini about earlier today, that we're going to have to create different levels of management in order to try to deal with it. Because in part, what the dominant thing that we want to do with ours is do cooperative housing, which is different than how most CLTs do housing. They usually do limited equity, private home ownership, and we want to do something different. So we got to create a framework to do that. And so that's still information for us.
Okay. Two quick questions. And then I know Malcolm X grassroots movement had like a 100-page document on like police for like a minute, but I can't find it for the life of me.
I'll email it to you. I wrote it.
Alright. That one had some gems in there. And then the last thing would be, do you think that like with your food operation, like is there like, do you think you can maybe hoping to one day scale it towards like disaster relief or riot support or?
Exactly.
Yes.
Okay. So,
You just, I tried to speak in a little cold on that, but when I said that part of it is defensive, that's exactly, look, we ain't no secret. Myself and some of the other folks who were the bedrock of this, we come from a revolutionary nationalist tradition that's been under some serious attack for a minute. The Calvin Carter's free the land, so there's different levels to what we're trying to do in acquiring this property. It's not just for some abstract thing everybody should be aware of. This is trying to go somewhere and to do some specific things relative to the attainment of self-determination for black people first and foremost.
Yeah, the scope of the land has tactic,
Yeah.
just from how it sits.
And where it sits in Jackson, right? And so I may be saying a little bit too much, but what the hell? This area right here, this little section of town right here, this is the second highest point in the city of Jackson. So it sits on a little ridge. Most of Jackson is fairly flat. But this one sits on a little ridge, and if you get right up here on the top of this building, at least what we own, this is one of the highest natural points or somewhat elevated points there. So I can see from right here, particularly at this corner, you can see roughly around a 4-mile radius on any good day around it. So you can kind of see anything that's coming at you, right? And so that's not by accident that the folks who first moved down there in 1971 from the Republic of New Africa, who they did some scoping out. It's not by accident that they are in this, they chose this community and why we are still there, like as their descendants. And so the RNA house, just to bring that up so folks know more about this particular neighborhood, the RNA house, where the shootout in 1971 happened, is right here. Right here. So if you ever heard the case, if you never heard of it, look up the RNA 11, the Republic of New Africa 11. In the case of Mario Badeli, where the shootout happened in August 21st, 1971, that was right here in this neighborhood. So it's no accident why we're still there or present. And so you'll understand the longevity of certain type of movement and of things. And so this morning, thankfully, Professor Bakchi invited us to it. There's an art exhibit that's happening, I was going to say here, but over in Manhattan, in the Lower East Side, that's talk about some of the memory. And one of the things that we want to do, we don't own that house yet, but one of the things we want to do is turn that into a museum. It's designated when you go to Jackson. There's this little sign that says with 31 or something like that. It doesn't tell you what it is.
Yeah.
So somebody who knows the history has to actually tell you what it is. And so we want to buy that and then turn it into this kind of museum, basically, that tells its history and the story. Which is important for us to understand, why this neighborhood, there's nothing random about this. This is, a 50-year project, basically,
Yeah.
if you really want to look at it.
So I also have multiple questions, and I might be a little out of my depth with this all quite newly. But first of all, and related to what you just mentioned, in that this is a very central location, and in that there is this continuum of revolutionary behavior here in this, I guess, area. To me, farming has always been a very visual affect as well, especially as a city kid.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was wondering if visibility, your placement, being in an urban center and then seeing farms, etc., has an impact on the surrounding community, and if so, how? And then, yeah, my next question.
Yes and no. Yes, for like a younger generation. To older generations, I would actually honestly have to tell you no. And why? Let me tell you why. About 20% of the people in Jackson have farms in their backyard. Like already, that's just,
And we've been doing it for forever.
yeah, that's just a habit that people have brought down with them from the Delta and other parts that they came with. And it's just part of, you know, I'll repeat something I've said many times before because it's true. Like there's a certain level of what I would just call basic survival consciousness that exists in the black community in Mississippi that you just don't find many other places. Like that's real, I'm not exaggerating that. You know, like, and one of the things I often try to frame when people ask me, like, the beauty about Mississippi is I don't have to convince people that they oppressed.
No,
And that helps in organizing. Right? That helps in organizing. I think anybody that's ever done it can attest to that. You know, because the conversation, the hardest conversation, typically I would say, just speaking the eye, that I have with folks is, I already know what the hell you're talking about. What we gonna do about it?
yeah.
Like that's the real conversation. When like you ain't telling me nothing I don't know. Convince me your program is gonna do something different or better than what's been tried before. So that's a different starting point.
It's a lot of theory in Jackson, or it's been a lot of theory introduced to Jackson. And folks are jaded. We're ready for practice.
Yeah, they're like what
What's
prove
the
it, show me. What. So in that sense, it's varied. And it's a it's a kind of place, both good and bad. There's both good and bad to it. Like it's a very parochial, and I'm not saying that in a negative sense, but you got like on my block in most places, you typically got 3 or 4 generations that either living like in the same house or in some proximity to each other. And so it's worlds of, like, the mutual aid there is very much dependent around your family, and it's a family support network. And one of the things I often argue, what we're trying to do is extend the solidarity economy that exists into relationships that are beyond just your familiar relationships. Because it already exists. That's something that already exists. It's not something that we created. It already exists. And the vast majority of black folks in Jackson who are, living, you got this term precariousness now. Like that's been the norm for our folks in this area for quite some time. You don't make it without extensive systems of solidarity of, grandmama doing childcare, cousin driving, your kids to school, somebody doing some extra cooking, somebody paying your phone bill, somebody paying your electric bill that's in your family, and y'all just basically circulating this value around. In turn, most people just ain't gonna make it unless that already exists. Like that's the reality of how the working class, the black working class, is already organized here. So our thing is, can we take what already exists in that sense and create a network through like time banking and some of the stuff we're trying to develop, where people can share with each other and exchange in that type of value without necessarily having to know each other.
Yeah.
Right? That's the thing I think that we could add and try to extend to create a broader system of like, you can get your needs met, you know, but some needs met. You can get some of your needs met by other folks who have similar needs as you in the community who you may not know.
A couple questions. One, what is your relationship to the mayor, to the police and police commissioner, and how dependent are you on that relationship should the next mayor, for example, if you have a friendly relationship now, should the next mayor not be as friendly? That would be one.
We try to build a model. I'm gonna answer the second part first. We try to build a model so we're not dependent upon regime change.
Yeah.
So if there's a, favorable mayor there, great. If there's not a favorable mayor there,
Great.
okay, that's is what it is, and we keep moving forward. The mayor who's there now is a comrade, a strange comrade, but a comrade. With folks we know well. We presently are not working together. We're not seeing eye to eye, particularly on a number of policy issues and some choices that have been made. But I will say this, and I've always said this: there will be time, and I think that time is going to happen soon, real soon, like next month soon. That we'll be working together on certain terms again.
Yeah.
The conditions are going to force it. That's just an objective. What the white supremacists who just got in office in Mississippi plan on doing in Jackson, Mississippi.
We're gonna have
Our differences are going to be they're not going to be erased, but they'll be mute compared to what we're going to have to face.
Mm-hmm.
So my disagreement with you around this particular policy, yes, it's a serious thing, but I can struggle with you in a way I can't struggle with them.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to unite, and we'll figure out what the terms of that are when that time comes, and we'll work where we can work with each other.
In the connection with what you just said about white supremacy, given the Supreme Court rulings about rulings on eminent domain, for example, which makes it all very, very easy on practically any ground to seize properties from the people. How secure are you in the land trust, for example, and your acquisitions?
In the ultimate sense, not secure at all. And I think we just need to be honest about that. Until there is no United States,
It can see. It can see what they want.
they're gonna do what they do until we defeat them. So let's just be clear about that. We don't have no illusions about that. But that's why we trying to build the movement that we need with everybody. Now, in the short term in Mississippi, one thing to note is Mississippi eliminated its eminent domain statute. And they eliminated it so black folks, namely us, so that we couldn't use it a couple of years ago. So when Chokwe Senior, that's technically not his name, but when Chokwe Senior was the city councilman, the Malcolm X grassroots movement was looking at some policies that were being talked about and then implemented in short order in Richmond, California, where the mayor was Gail McLaughlin. Am I remembering her name correctly?
Yeah.
That's right, it was Gail McLaughlin, right? I couldn't remember it the other day. Well, she used eminent domain in Richmond, California to deal with the foreclosure crisis and to deal with the banks in particular, right? And so we were like, that's a good idea, that's a good model. We could use that, we should use that. We just talked about it. We wasn't even empowered to do it. We just talked about it. And because a few Negroes decided to talk about a great idea that was being used,
State got rid of
they said, let's just eliminate that the next season, which they did. And, so they took it off the books so in order we could use it. So now in the short term, they can't use it against us either.
But they have a supermajority.
But yeah, that's the thing. There's a now Republican supermajority in Mississippi. they can put it back on the books if they want to, and I'm sure that's one of the threats, maybe not this year, but somewhere down the line that they're gonna use. So, I mean, ultimately, the folks in this community gonna have to see the value in this and defend it. That's gonna be the true measure of whether it stays or goes, or you know, to what extent it's gonna do anything. So we build on it and prepare to defend it, but I you know, like to answer to your question, somebody asked that question. I don't think we shouldn't lie to ourselves. We shouldn't lie to other people to think that just because we got some legal documents that it's safe from our enemies. You know, if that was the case, then you know the treaties that they signed with all the indigenous nations would be worth something.
Thanks, Holly. I was wondering if I could ask a question about funding strategy for a second. I think that the book talked about, like in past or sort of past cooperative movements, the dangers of relying on sort of progressive white donors in other places as a sort of unsustainable measure. And then there was another part that was talking about the Corporation Jackson and sort of just not having big funders interested. And then I was thinking about how here in New York, over the past couple of years, there's been a lot of like sort of pretty well-intentioned, people-centered community groups that have received like foundation money from Ford and other groups to do sort of community planning efforts, but then there's been questioning about like, well, how much do they just end up kind of sort of beholden to like capitalist interests because they're receiving that funding. And so I'm just wondering how Corporation Jackson squares all those different complicated issues.
A lot of frustrating politics. So we get foundation money. We've sought out foundation money. There's been a few people who engage with us. The vast majority do not. They're choosing. But also our behavior to a certain extent, to be honest with you, is prohibitive to some foundations too. So, you know, like early on in the game when we were very sexy and appealing to some forces, you know, they were kind of like throwing money at us, and we said, if you're gonna give us some money, we're gonna use your money to buy property. Are you fine with that? And only one foundation said yes. Everybody else said no, we can't do that, but we don't need your money. That was our principle and our stand. Because what we need is property. That's gonna be here after I'm gone, after you gone. I can leave it to my children or people in the community. That's what we need. So if you wanna work with us, these are the terms for working with us. So what we try to do is set the terms for how you work with us. And if it don't work, you know, like, you keep your money. I'm not, you know, but I think it comes from the politics of the stance of the group that you are with, and why the unity of the folks you're working with is paramount to be able, like, you know, that you can keep your change. You know, because I'm gonna work my agenda. I'm not working yours. You know, or you can take your money away, basically. But you got to be secure enough to know I'm gonna still do this work whether I get foundation money or not.
Yeah.
And like just earlier this year, we were having a conversation. You know, at this point, I've been a major fundraiser for the organization, and so I always try to tell people, hey, money getting thin, it's getting low. Just so y'all know, checks might not be coming, but we try to set ourselves up to be like,
Yeah, we'll be okay.
at some point this is gonna end.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of foundations or anybody else giving us money, or the entertainers that we know helping us out, which has another been a big, you know, support network that we've been able to draw upon. Like at some point this is gonna run out, but that's the point of like getting the property, right? Because, you know, like what we always say is, if worst come to worst, y'all can live in one, you know, you can squat one of these places.
Yeah, we got a couple places to live.
Yeah, you'll be all right, you know. And you got some food that you could eat. you know, then the after that,
We can create. We can
you
do
know.
it.
But I think we got to get to that point.
We have.
So you kind of did the conversation back and forth, and the questions at the second part of the program instead of
I was trying to just adjust.
do you want to?
I'm gonna run through it real quick, but since we started answering questions, I'm
We
just
got
trying to deal with that.
2 questions. We got one here, and I think the brother who asked the farm question had another question.
Well, if there's somebody else, we'll come back to him.
Okay.
There's somebody else.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
I was wondering, I know that this is probably, just share whatever you want on this question, because I know that it's like, probably you want to keep it amongst your organizers. But I'm just wondering, I've been thinking a lot about like counterinsurgency in all the different forms that it takes. So I'm just wondering in your experience, because you guys do have, it's kind of a similar vein in terms of like the land question, like you guys have such a strong build within the community and you're like, yeah, you're really building something that's very real and material. So I'm wondering what experiences you had with counterinsurgency and the different ways that you have found like ways to combat that.
You mean counterinsurgency in terms of state disruption?
Yeah, and also like just factioning within yourselves, like what kind, you talked about it a little bit before with like just building solidarity against right-wing stuff. Yeah.
I mean, in truth, we're not gonna know some of that for years to come.
Yeah.
You know, just how the various machinations of the government work. We know that they've done it. That we can definitely prove that to you that, you know, some folks have been in our midst who shouldn't have been there. I mean, but again, this is a point of coming from a particular political tradition. I always assume that there's 2 or 3 agents in this room right now, right? And that the government is going to do what it's going to do to protect itself. Can be paranoid about that to a degree. I mean, that's just understand what your role and function is. And I think, you know, what I think we're trying to learn how to do, I'm not going to say we perfected it because it's definitely created some tension in the work at various times. You know, so I come out of personally, I'm going to speak personally, I come out of a very democratic, centralist, need to know training and orientation. And that has its strengths and it has its weaknesses. But a large part of this work requires a very horizontal, you know, piece, and there's a give and take that we are still trying to figure out how to manage. You know, so for me, I'm a person, certain level of security conscious ain't gonna never go nowhere. So there's certain things that I just deal with everybody. Like that's it. You don't need to know. That ain't for you to know. I see my brother, but that ain't your information to know. You know, and so you're not getting it. Right? And like some people know me well enough, like just certain things, just don't even ask because I'm not going to tell you. You know, and I would tell people to a certain, like if you knew this information is actually a danger to you. Right? And how I would learn certain things, like, you know, like at least my mom would say, hey babe, you don't tell me X, Y, and Z because if they come, you know, and they snatch me up, which has happened to me with my family, I can't give you up if I don't know certain information in the first place.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's just a principle that we kind of operate on, like, you know, I know what I need to know. Now you got to have a certain level of trust to really function like that, and accountability.
Yeah.
You know, because you can abuse that I know everything, you know nothing, you know, type of power too, which is one of the weaknesses of it.
Yeah.
And so we just try to limit that, I think, as a general principle, to just be clear. This is a security question. Everything else is open. It should be open. Money, the decision making, like all those things need to be as open as they possibly can, so that folks don't trip out. Why is this one getting paid more, or why did the money go? That creates tension and problems. We all know from experience real quick. So that's something we just try to be very transparent about. And I think we've had some this disruption around that.
Yeah.
2 instances that I can point to very clearly. And it was defeated because the information was transparent.
Yeah.
right? And it was like, well, this was within your budget. Like, the budget is on mine. Okay. What's your question? That's how much this person got paid. That's what they normally get paid. What's the question? If you find some impropriety in that, or why or how that decision got made, or what the resources are, that's a question you bring to the group, right? And, that decision was made democratically. It can be unmade democratically, but it's not a secret. You know, it's not something we would hide from anybody. And that just basically diffused it, because the people was like, well, I got you on this point. Like, if you had asked the question, I would have told you that you didn't have to steal it from the computer.
Yeah.
We want to end in a quick second, y'all, because it's almost 9 o'clock. So last key question.
What are some international examples that you look to for inspiration, or that you align with in terms of the way that they do their work around the world?
Oh man.
So we start with the framework of the Mondragon principles in Spain, developing worker cooperatives. Recently, I had the opportunity to experience two international congresses in Venezuela. First, the International Congress of Communes, Social Movements, and Popular Power. And we learned the idea of what it is to establish a communal society. Learning from the examples of communes in Venezuela. We deepened that knowledge the second time around with the Afro Descendants Congress in Venezuela, learning how this process is birthed out of an indigenous and black struggle in Venezuela and how that takes place. We just did a report back from all of our international trips this past year on Saturday. We learned from Ghana. This year we learned twice from Cuba. So, boy, that's a broad stroke to
And
know,
Egypt.
Yeah, and Egypt this year to see where we're kind of gleaning the field from.
I mean, we there. I think just to answer, we eclectic.
Yeah.
Like, if you know a good example, we'll study it. You know, if you know a bad example, we'll study that too. You know, just we trying to learn. So we're not pigeonholed in that sense. You know, I just shared with our group from our internal message, and there was an article in the Guardian about, a communal project in the UK, which I did get a chance to just briefly visit when me and Saki got a chance to go there. The writing's always a little bit more idyllic in a certain sense than the reality, but there were some things there I thought that was worth learning that I would, I believe it was good enough to share with our folks to be like, hey, check this out. There's some things that they're doing. So we draw from everything. I mean, but in more detail, I guess, if what you're asking, the Zapatistas have been a big, example. Some of the commune stuff, particularly from about 2001 to 2008, I would say that we did a lot of study around some of the stuff in Venezuela, some of the solidarity economy stuff in Brazil in the 1990s and early 2000s. Particularly some of the stuff associated with like La Via Campesina and some of the stuff that we studied that. In an older iteration of stuff, Amilcar Cabral and the work of the PIGC in Guinea-Bissau and some of the stuff that they set up both during and after the war was stuff that I grew up studying, that our organization I was a part of grew up studying. So eclectic, man, all over. You try to take the good and the bad, and then you got to figure out what's going to actually work in your context.
Yeah.
Right? Because just trying to apply stuff, we don't have a 500-year relationship to the land and that territory, say like the way the Zapatistas do, right? And so their knowledge and understanding of the land, and even their cultural relationship is different than ours. And that shows up in a number of different ways around how people work at and relate to the land. We still in the context. So like in Mississippi, even though there's a lot of folks in the older generation who work the land, you got a younger generation trying to get away from that.
Yeah.
Right? And don't see it as a gift. They see it kind of like a burden or something negative. So, trying to draw on all those different things. This was the last one, and then we got to shut it down.
All right, so I actually want to come to that point of local folks and their receptivity. So I was actually living in Jackson, Mississippi for a while.
Wait.
I'm Chanel Evans. Some folks have seen me in the little group chat. But anyway, I went to Jackson State for undergrad and graduate school, and so my thought of seeing J.R. Lynch Street up there. Okay, what's the
Right in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
J.R. Lynch Street University.
the support that you're receiving within the city, within the surrounding counties, like what do you feel like the receptivity is like? You said like, the survival of the project depends on those who are there. So like, how are things looking even, across generations? You just mentioned, that whole gap, like how are you seeing the transmission of knowledge, transmission of enthusiasm about this?
Mixed. I would say mixed, actually. In this area, the folks who I would say love us the most are the renters. There's a little subset of folks who are situated in a project roughly right here. And they kind of have a little base community that's right over here. They are very much into eliminating all the renters in the neighborhood. And so we have some tension amongst ourselves. We're in a joint planning process with each other though now. So that's a good thing. But it's different sets of interests.
Yeah.
And we represent trying to our best to represent working class interests. And I would say I think those forces are trying to represent, I'm gonna use the old school language, the petty bourgeois interests. And what their plan is because this is so folks, what you see here, this is part of Jackson State University, JSU. So we're this is like I think from where is Lynch Street here. So from where the Masonic Temple is, which is about right here, which is one of the old black institutions in Jackson, Mississippi. King spoke there. NAACP offices are there. Have been there for like 60-something years, I think.
Yeah.
So from that point there to our office is exactly like a mile.
Yep.
So we're like right, all right in the next, to each other. Their interest is turning as much of the housing stock that's over in this neighborhood right here. Their interest, they're trying to buy it all up as much as possible to convert it to student housing. Right? Because JSU has off and on had a student housing shortage, as you know. So that's their interest. We are opposed to that because if it only is going to serve students, it's going to push the people particularly who rent, out of this neighborhood, right? And it's not like you live in Jackson. It ain't like there's a bunch of extra housing stock anywhere in the city that's really available, and it ain't like a whole bunch of people are building any housing in Jackson. So that means if you get pushed out of here, you go on to Clinton, you know what I mean, or you go on to
South Jackson, or Pearl, or one of those other places, and that diffuses the concentration of black people, and is ultimately going to diffuse black power. So we strategically are opposed to that, because ultimately, Jackson State is for those who don't know, is a HBCU, historically black college and university. But some of the current leadership the past 10 years has been trying to rebrand it as a urban university.
I'd say that was more. It's been more 22 years since the Ayers case, since like the Ayers settlement. Since that, Jackson State received state funding, and there's been a large measure by which the state wants to usurp Jackson State and put it into a University of Mississippi system, positioning it as the urban University of Mississippi. Take away presidents, employ chancellors, and IHL. There's been a lot of conflict between black folks in the state around IHL with that. And I think that acquisition would lean more towards the favor of a usurped black college.
So when I say mix,
Yeah.
you know, we in a contest zone.
Yeah, we sure.
We in a contest zone. So some people love us, some people hate us. And that's a reality that you know we deal with. Most of the working people in that area who are renters have deep love, I think, for what we're trying to do, you know, and support it in various ways. And I think, and ultimately, like the success, when I was talking about, the success is going to be how do we transition and transform their relationship, right? Into a communal, commons-oriented relationship, as opposed to trying to extend a whole bunch of private property, which we don't have the amount of capital and resources to do, nor will we want to.
Yeah.
Right. But you know, there's certain things, just to be clear, so everybody knows, there's certain things that we do unite with the folks that's over there, right? Because there's broader white pressure on them too, that we both share. So that, you know, it's like, again, it's like kind of like with the city in which you're asking. There's points where we know that we can. I can sit down at the table and I know where I disagree with you, and I can also sit down at the table and know where I agree with you.
Yeah.
You know, and we try to be southern, civil, polite. Let's work on the things we agree upon.
Yeah.
And the things we don't agree upon, we
Come back to them and let
well,
it go.
yeah, we'll deal with that. So I want to just real quick go through some of this. Now that this is working, I won't talk about it because we need to be out here quick, relatively quick. Now I don't like me. I think if you let it sit, it
you got it.
freezes. Hope you liked it. Hope you enjoyed it. And hopefully you can donate.
One of our purposes here tonight is to try to raise some funds for Cooperation Jackson program. Yes.
People want to see it. I got it on
Yeah.
my laptop.
For a deeper political discussion, political and programmatic discussion, we will be meeting with Kali again tomorrow at the James Baldwin School, room 318, at 6:30. And for those of you who want to deepen your relationship and supporting of this work, we have a regular committee, Cooperation Jackson Solidarity Committee. If it's for you, please make yourself known to myself or Kay or Kim or Alan or Paul or any of the folks you see that have been setting this thing up. And finally, substantive and true change always begins in a minority. And we have this island in Mississippi, in the Mississippi Delta area, that can be overcome. But nevertheless, we have to invest in our victories. And I'm not just talking about our commitment and time and energy. We have to invest in these projects. I myself am already a sustainer for Cooperation Jackson, and I would encourage everyone to invest in this pioneering project.
Some of you already donating to Cooperation Jackson? You know, a number of people in the room
Yeah,
are old friends.
people who are donating to Cooperation Jackson, raise your hands. There are people here. Yeah, look at you, look around. Woo, yeah.
And we need all those folks that are starting to pull their collars up and put their hats on and their scarves and everything, to just kind of sit still for another couple of minutes and think about how you might actually be able to play an important role in what goes on in Jackson, Mississippi over the next year, over the next 2 years, over the next 3 years. low dollar donors and what a difference that they have made to various political campaigns. And I don't think anybody here is in a position to write that check $250,000, but I think plenty of us are in a position to donate $10 every month in an easy deduction, as easy as your Spotify account. And that kind of a contribution really adds up, especially when you're talking about the multiples of people who could be engaged in that. For example, if you gave $10 a month for the next year, that would be $1,200. Now that doesn't seem like very much, but if you did it for a couple of years, or 3 years, when Polly and Joshua are still gonna be there, still be trying to put their work together, that'd be $3,600. Now, Joshua, you don't have to build a production center, but what could you do with $3,600?
$3,600, I wrote a list. We could beef up our national outreach and our local outreach. We print a lot of stuff, and we're facing into a moment where we're going to be printing these things in-house, but until we print things in-house, we still have to use a neighborhood print shop that can go towards that budget. We feed a hell of a lot of people a lot of time. A lot of times people come to hang out. We like Kwame, who runs our CPC, does great work with our meals and things like that, for meetings and things like that. We have a budget for food. We can beef up our Ida B. Wells Community Plaza survey. We currently have a survey for members of the community. We go out scheduled Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I'm not going to say what we practice like, but scheduled Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to survey the area. We could bolster that by having some support financially as well. Purchasing tools for the green team. We have a worker cooperative that always needs tools to be refined and sharpened and things like that that would help their work. Purchasing items for Freedom Farms. We are testing out and teasing out a lot of soil technology. I've learned a lot that I didn't know, that soil don't always get along with each other. We're looking for methods to have a better system for that. $1,200 to $3,600, scaling up our production within the CPC, making sure that that there are resources there for folks to be able to learn to work all of the technology that's within our CPC. Those are all just some short-term things that $3,600 can help us with.
Yeah, I'm not saying that people can only have to contribute $10, because there's a possibility for people to either give more as a one-time donation, as to pass your debit card to the people at the door, but it's something that people need to think about, because this work is going on.
Is there an online option for donations?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes,
That's how mine goes, and last year I signed up at this event. So, just
Can I
talk
ask-
to the people.
Can I ask a question?
Uh-huh.
For the bigger picture items, when you think about for next year or the year after, like what are you looking in the next year that you want to see happen?
Yeah, this.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
Yeah, thank you.
So I'm gonna work with the. So this is what you didn't get to see earlier, unfortunately. This is some scaling, actually, of the model and the layout that we want to use, right? And this phase here, for this aquaponic setup that you see that folks laid out for us, this is $50,000. Just for the setup. And these are the actual kind of like things that we would purchase and buy, and what the kind of layout would be on the inside of the building.
Yeah.
And there you see like the actual.
And then we like to buy some cake.
See, and that.
Is there anybody
answer your question.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it was right on time.
Standing up and saying, yes, I